Hello, welcome to the Team-Based Learning Collaborative Current Topics in Team-Based Learning. Today we'll have an introduction to team-based learning. My name's Jim Sibley, and I'm a faculty developer at the Faculty of Applied Science at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. We've been using team-based learning for about 6 years, and basically have not found a course or a context that it isn't effective in. We've everything from sustainability and ethics courses to highly mathematical courses like aerodynamics. It has worked very, very well for us. When you talk about team-based learning, you're really going to have to go back to the early work of Larry Michelson. Back in the late 70s, he was teaching business at the University of Oklahoma, and he had classes of about 20 students, and in 1 year his class size was to go from 20 to 120. And he really didn't want to become the talking head lecturer, and he was really wondering on what he would be able to do to help his students. Most of his colleagues, suggested that he was going to be forced into the lecturing. What he did is he thought about what he wanted his students to be able to do. And he really wanted them to focus on using the content to solve problems. And he came up with a methodology, team-based learning. Now, this is not a way to add a team activity to your lecture course. This is a unique way to structure an entire course. In a team-based learning course, we divide the course into a series of modules, typically about 2 weeks in length. And the modules have a very structured design to them. At the beginning of each module, we complete what is known as the readiness assurance process, and then for the bulk of the module time, we end up having the students work in teams on application-oriented problems. This readiness assurance process is a 5-step process where we ensure the students have a preliminary grasp of the foundational knowledge that they're going to need to solve problems. This is distinctly different than providing a reading quiz where I get some accountability that the students have completed the readings, but I get no assurance that they have any preliminary grasp of the foundational concepts. So this readiness assurance process, again, is 5 steps, and we start by assigning a set of readings that the students will complete outside of the class. We typically assign somewhere between 30 and 60 pages or 2 textbook chapters for a 2-week module. So they come to class, the first meeting of a module, having completed those readings, and what we do then is we give them an individual test. We give them a 20-question multiple choice test. The test focuses on the important concepts that they're going to need to begin to problem solve. The test focuses sort of at the table of content level, not at the index level. So we're going for the big concepts, not picky detail. So this is a 20-question multiple choice test again, and it's about half knowledge and recall level and about half simple application. Once the students have completed this 20-question test, they hand in their Scantron sheets, and they form into their teams, and they retake the very same test using these cards known as IF-AT. It stands for Immediate Feedback Assessment Technique. They're kind of scratch-and-win multiple-choice cards. So the students will look at a question, they'll discuss a question, decide which area to scratch off on. If they find the star underneath, they move on to the next question. If they don't, they go back to the question, talk about it some more, and then continue to scratch till they find the right answer. We encourage them to go back to the question by using decremental scoring so that they get 4 points for the first scratch, 2 points for the second scratch, 1 point for the third scratch, and nothing if they have to scratch all 4. The one very remarkable thing of this test is that the students leave the test. Every student knows the answer to every question. These tests are high-energy events, very noisy and chaotic, but the students really do discuss the course material as they work through the answers. Once the team test is starting to wrap up, I circulate around and I glance at people's cards, and anytime that they've scratched off all four, i.e. they don't know the answer to that question, I encourage them to do something known as the appeals process. And what we do is we have a form that we hand out, and the students can put a scholarly written argument together to appeal one of the answers. It does a couple of nice things. One is, if they got it wrong, it pushes them back into the reading material right where they had difficulty. The other thing is it effectively truncates mark-whining conversations, so that when the test is complete, you as the instructor can say, if you think that's wrong, write an appeal, I'll consider it after class. So we allow appeals on two grounds. One is that there's ambiguity in the question, and the students need to describe the source of the ambiguity and provide an alternate wording for that question. And this might be where they also capture sometimes I've keyed a question wrong, and they can point that out in the appeal. The other place that they can declare ambiguity is in the readings themselves. They may have gone to additional resources, or the readings may contradict themselves, and all they need to do is to go into the readings, find those page references and quotes, and get those onto that appeals form, and I'll consider that after class. The appeals is a very powerful thing. Once I grant an appeal and I assign, extra marks to that team that appeal the question, only the team that appeals gets the questions, not every team, so that there's incentive for teams to appeal questions that are incorrect. So once they've completed that individual test and then the team test, the instructor has access in real time to the results of the individual test. And the advantage of that is I know what the students don't know. I know what the students are having trouble with. So I can provide a very pointed little mini lecture or instructor for clarification on just the concepts the students are having difficulty with. So if I look at the readiness assurance process, there's some really intriguing things that happen from its design. If I compare the way the students interact with easy concepts and the way they interact with hard concepts, I've tried to capture it in this table. When we go to the readings, the easy concepts and the hard concepts are worked with. The individual readiness assurance test, easy concepts and hard concepts are tested. In the team test, both sets of types of concepts are tested. But the harder concepts are likely going to be discussed a little more, so there's a bit more focus on the difficult concepts. When I move into the appeals process is completely centered at the harder concepts, the things the students got wrong, the things that the students still are struggling with. Finally, in that mini lecture or the instructor clarification, I focus in on those hard concepts and just discuss those. Really intriguing that this sort of differential feedback for easy versus hard concepts is built into the design of the readiness assurance process. It's not some master skill that the instructor needs to have. So later in the semester, I'll take all the student marks and I'll share them back with the class, and they're often surprised in the way that the teams outperform most individuals. Here's some data, and this is from a 1989 paper that Larry Michelson wrote, where he looked at about 20 years of his teams, and he found that usually, 99.95% of the time, that teams outperform their best member, and by a significant margin, 14%. Probably even more interesting is the worst team typically outperforms the best student in the class. When students see this, they're very surprised by this, but it really does show that more heads are better than an individual. So here we are back at the diagram of the typical layout for a TBL module. We've gone through the readiness assurance process piece, that 5-step process, that's typically the first class meeting of a module. 50 to 70 minutes is usually sufficient to complete that. Sometimes when I'm dealing with a 50-minute class, I will shorten that test down to 15 questions just so that I can fit all the pieces in. Next, we're going to look at the in-class team activities, these application-oriented activities that the students spend most of the module time working on. So when we design these application activities for team-based learning, we use something called the 4 S's. And the 4 S's stand for we pick a significant, relevant, authentic problem. We give all the teams the same problem. We ask them to make a specific choice, and then they simultaneously report that choice. That simultaneous reporting is actually one of the really powerful pieces of team-based learning. We often just have the students work on a problem, what test would you order first in the ER when a patient presents with the following symptoms, 1, 2, or 3. Interesting thing about this as an instructor is you infrequently get to look out into a large lecture theater and have any idea of what student thinking is happening or not. This is a way that you can see student thinking, students can see student thinking, and there's a comparability between various decisions that various groups have made. When I write a really good problem and I divide the class down the center with half the class says 2 and half the class says 3, the most difficult task for me, the instructor, is to actually get out of the way and let the students discuss their decisions. So these application activities, I present an in-class problem, that can be fed by either individual homework or the readiness assurance process and readings. I give them time to discuss that problem within their team and make a decision. We do a simultaneous report, and then I facilitate a discussion across the whole class looking at differences in student thinking as they made that decision. To help you understand this a little bit, I'm going to show you a activity that I use in my face-to-face workshop. These are one of the examples I use. The context here is I'm an instructor in a writing course, and my students are working with the active and passive voice. And we're going to think about cognitive skills development, team development, and the reporting conversation. Here are 3 possible activities I could get my students to do. And I want you to consider which one would make the students think the most deeply about the subject matter, and which one would have the richest conversation once the reporting has happened. So A, I could have the students list the mistakes that writers frequently make that detract from the writing in the active voice. I could give them a passage and have them identify clear examples of the active or passive voice, or I could give them a passage and have them identify a sentence where they think the passive voice is used most appropriately. So that's 3 possible ways to write an assignment, and I want you to think about which one of them would have the students think most deeply about the subject matter, and when there's that reporting conversation, which one would have the richest conversation. I'll give you a moment to think about that.